Welcome
Everybody.
welcome everybody. We are back with our monthly dragon. Chris is back in the house again. Hi, Chris.
Hello, Anna. How's it going?
Very, very nicely. I just had a different show with Elisabeth Peetz, who was talking about the
Ah,
Najdorf, which was clearly not the dragon. But the interesting part about it is she was talking about a couple of patterns in the Sicilian. And I was like, I know all of this. We had a couple of shows already. And some of those patterns are reoccurring, the sacrifice on C3, etc., etc. It was super interesting. And I never had known before we would have had our show. So I'm very glad we're having this. What do
you're
we
like
have?
a new man. You're a new man, Anna,
I
now.
feel like a newborn Sicilian child. Let's say it like that. So,
Brilliant.
what kind of dragon are we talking about this time, Chris?
Well, we got some thrills and spills today, and I'm going to illuminate you to a new concept here, which is the dragon endgame, but not just any type of endgame. It's not going to be some dull study. You'll watch carefully. So we get the tactics, of course, ahead of that first.
It's very nice.
But essentially, as you know, I follow the games that come in every month in the dragon, and every now and again we see a repeat of this very exciting variation. I'm not sure whether it should still be in existence anymore, but for some reason we do get loads and loads of games in it, and it just brought back a lot of memories. So I thought we'd crack on. I'd show it to you and introduce it to you, and maybe some of the audience, if I might.
Let's please. We
Right.
can't
Not only
wait.
that. I look at that. So I don't normally do this, but I did a study of the opponents involved. Okay. So championing the black cause in this particular game. This was in the intercollegiate Seattle event in the good old USA.
Okay.
And we had with the black pieces was a young IM, very young IM called Brian Sebasti Escalante Ramirez, which is such a cool name. It's unbelievable. So he's playing with the black pieces. And with the white pieces is actually Carissa Yip. Do you know Carissa Yip?
Absolutely. Well, that name rings a bell. Of course, super talented US player. I think she is just barely 17 or something.
She's pretty young, but I can tell you she was the youngest American female to ever beat a Grandmaster. At the age of 10, that was apparently. Did you know that?
That must hurt as a Grandmaster.
No, I tell you, she beat right. Okay, I'm glad you said that because she beat Alexander Ivanov,
Mhm.
and funny enough, people keep reminding me that I was the youngest. Magnus I was the first Grandmaster that Magnus ever beat, and I thought if I can take the heat off me a little bit by getting somebody else, and that he lost to like a 10-year-old.
I'm not even
sure that. I'm not sure that statistic is true, but it says it on YouTube. So, I mean, I can presume that.
You cannot believe everything on YouTube. Our show is gold.
Except, of course, if anyone's watching this on YouTube now.
100%.
Right, let's crack on. If I might. So, essentially, what we're going to do today is we're looking at the good old Sicilian dragon straight away. Here we go. And Yugoslav Attack.
Looks familiar.
As you know, this is where white has to make a decision of which move today. Now, we're kind of looking at a 9G4 variation sort of today, although the game actually goes castles, bishop D7, and then G4 in this particular. But I just wanted to stop for a second to talk about the move 9G4. So I'm sure you remember this now. White's played G4 so they can go G5. So in other words, it dissuades the move D5 because of G5. And the main move by a long way in this position is for black to play the move bishop to E6. And I've told you that this is how much it's changed over time. Back in the old days, white would just castle in this position automatically. But these days, the main move by a long way is just to take on E6. So we have knight takes E6, pawn takes E6, and then white castles. And we have a situation whereby this is potentially a target for white, but it is controlling the D5 square. Black's a little bit looser around here because this F pawn has transferred, but on the other hand, there's potential pressure against F3. So it's kind of a nice little imbalance. But if I might just return us to this position here. So before knight takes C6 was played, white always used to play the move castles, which gave black the chance, if they wanted to take on D4 and then swizzle their queen straight out to A5, attacking this pawn here.
That's the way.
Yeah, and then white would go A3 or king b1, and black will play rook fc8 and rook a b8. But I just wanted to bring to your attention another little idea here, which is that after castles, instead of swapping knights on d4, black could play knight e5.
Oopsie, loopsie.
And so the idea is, if white will play h4, and one of the main ideas of this knight e5 move here was actually so that black could play bishop to c4 in this position. The idea to trade off the bishop so that the knight could ultimately take its place in this square here. And of course, as you know only too well, if we can win a dark squared bishop for that knight, then we never get checkmated with the dragon bishop sitting. So that was one plan. It feels like a little bit of a slow plan, but instead of that plan, I had this once, queen a5, and just to highlight some of the tactics we're about to see soon.
Chris,
and yeah,
I'm sorry, I need to, because I cannot see it. So the plan is to put the bishop to c4.
Yeah,
but if
let me remind that. So one of the original plans is to go bishop c4.
So, but what happens? Can I? Why don't? There must be something which I'm missing. So, what happens after f4?
Right. Okay. So if f4, then of course we can take on f1, because if white takes this pawn here, knight here, then we can take back with the pawn and we're attacking.
Simple as this. All right.
Simple as that. I love it. This is going to be great. You're going to scrutinize all my variations today.
All of them. No. But this was, sorry, it was so on my mind. I couldn't silence. My brain
I
out.
was going to mention that, but I figured, I knew you'd bring it up. So the plan, though, essentially, one of the main plans behind it is to, as I say, get the knight.
Gotcha.
So that's the main idea.
Okay.
But after queen a5, let's just highlight how dangerous things can be really quick. If white now, obviously we're threatening to go bishop takes a2, because an attempt to trap it with b3 would allow queen a3 mate. So that would be a bit...
That's a nice mate, yeah.
And if white plays king b1 already, and I had this in a game actually at Gausdor in 1987. Oh my gosh, I am old. So queen a, so threatening here, and if white, so basically in this position, can you see the tactic, Anna? If anyone wants to stop, pause, and see a little tactic already available to black.
Tactics are already happening. I can't believe it. So that is unexpected.
And I did this especially for you today, Anna, because I know you like these type of tactics.
Thank you.
And there isn't even a rook. There's not even a rook on c8 yet.
Exactly. Why not? Oh, this is super interesting. So give me a couple of seconds. So now, what can happen here? What can we... So what happens if we take on f3? It will be taken back. We're opening the line a little bit. Is this helping? And it might. This might be interesting. If we give a check there, there's a... Is this happening? No, also not. No, I'm... Dear Chris, I don't want to...
you don't want to hold up the time for those people that are sitting at home going, come on, what's going on? You were there. You had it. I was there, opening up that one, and then, of course, opening up that one as well.
So both of them. Wow, I wasn't brave enough to open the second line like that, too.
So the idea is, I'm sure you can see, if the white knight was to take on e4, and I like to... That plan moves ahead, thing moves up. Then, of course, queen takes a2, check, king c1, and queen a1 would already be checkmate. So white can't take that second one. So instead, really nice. In the game that I had, white play queen d3. But after taking here, check and taking, bishop takes c3 is already pretty disastrous. I'm threatening the move queen takes a2, followed by queen b2 or queen a1, checkmate. And if, for example, white, well, there's no good way of dealing with that. But if, for example, white played queen b5, then check, king here, the view that the queen could block, then I could do it in a number of ways. I could either go queen a1, check, queen b1, and then queen a3, or queen a3, king b1, queen a1, whichever way you'd like to do it. So a nice little up and down with the queen there to help deliver checkmate. So that's just to highlight some of the tactics already around about f3 or on g4.
Juicy, very nice tactic indeed, and good to remember.
Good to remember. Okay, so in this game here, we had castles, bishop to d7, and then white played g4. So let's just talk about this position here. If white, you could say, well, why is white playing? Why is white playing g4 now? Well, the point is, obviously, if he played bishop c4, then he would simply be transposing to the 9 bishop c4 variation. And white did specifically choose to play knight g9 g4 in this position. If white played h4, then, for example, black can play h5, doesn't have to, and then probably there's not necessarily any better than bishop c4, which is a transposition to the Soltis variation, again a 9 bishop c4.
Mm-hmm.
So it's only logical 9g4, absolutely fine. And here's where we find ourselves at. And black now plays the move rook c8, bringing the rook to the half open file. Now, what's very important to appreciate, though, is that black can't just go ahead with a maneuver like here to here now, because white will have saved not one but 2 tempi by taking on c4 directly, rather than going out to c4 back to b3.
I see.
So that definitely can't be black's idea here. So we have pawn to h4 and white to play next, knight e5, and now we have here again, we have white continuing with the simple move pawn to h5. Now, I probably should say around about now, I'm not a great fan of this. I have played this, as you're going to find out, on a few occasions before, but I'm not such a fan of it now, because one of the main reasons is there's a number of situations where white can just calmly play this move bishop e2, bolstering this square here, f3, so cutting through a lot of these tactics. And still, if what black ever plays knight c4, it's not a gain of 2 tempo this time, but it's 1 tempo, because white played bishop e2 rather than bishop c4 back to b3. So the move bishop e2, for me, can be a frustrating move in a few possible variations. But amazingly, it just doesn't seem to happen. So if there's white players out there following this, I would highly recommend a few cases where white plays this frustrating bishop e2 move. So I think that
it's the fear to lose, which is not a real loss after you've already emphasized on it. But maybe that the idea to, okay, I'm pushing the bishop to e2 and then I have to push it on to c4 again. Maybe this is annoying for some white players. I don't know.
Yeah, but again, if you work it out, he's actually gaining time.
Exactly, as you described it already. Yeah.
So essentially, then white played h4 in this particular game. This is, of course, in Seattle very recently in this intercollegiate match, and black played knight e5.
There it
and
goes.
white then continued here simply. Well, what move would you say would white might play here? Let's talk about a move which I think would be an inferior move, and I suspect by now you know why. So if white decided I'm going to go straight for swapping off that dragon bishop, then I'm sure on a straightaway you'd say no, loving that sacrifice takes, and then queen a5. And the whole point is there are going to be tactics around. So for example, if king b2 to defend it and then rook c8 to attack it, if the queen dropped back here, let's talk about a couple of possibilities. For example, queen back to d2, then we would still have the knight takes f3 sacrifice, followed by knight takes e4. And of course, we're really pounding that pawn on c3. For example, I guess queen d4, because white is, of course, we mustn't forget at the moment, white is a rook up, albeit for a few pawns. Rook takes c3, queen takes here, queen check, king b1, and a bishop e6, a nice little move now, sliding over there to attack that pawn on a2. I like these ideas where black gets to involve all his remaining pieces, having sacrificed all the previous ones. But something like this, for example.
I even thought about sacrificing the queen, but this is better. Yeah.
So basically, something like this would be absolutely tasty for black, I would suggest. So that would be with them again. So here we're going to look at the move played in the game, which was h5 by white, which said, no, I'm cracking on straight away with things with the move h5. So this happened in the game. And now here we go then. So make sure you fasten your seatbelts, everybody, because here's what we're going to get. So in this position here, we had white to play, black to play, and black played queen a5, attacking, just developing the queen, and of course, facilitating the possibility of rook takes c3. Now, again, here, for example, I would suggest probably white should play bishop e2. But in fact, king b1 was the move played. On the other hand, if, for example, they take this too soon, h takes g6, I probably should mention this, then the f takes at least allows f takes so we don't get mated or down the h file, of course. This, of course, does make yourself a little bit vulnerable potentially along that diagonal, but we are controlling this check on c4. But for example, I had a game which were invoked fond memories where white played knight b3, attacking my queen, forcing it back, and then bishop e2. But now b5 is kind of a nice move because this pawn is only attacked twice, but then, of course, one of them is required to protect the f3 pawn. And after g5, this is quite a nice idea. You can meet that with b4. So you, of course, leaving this to be attacked so that you can take this one here on c3. And in this particular game, white played knight d5. takes, checking. But, of course, we mustn't forget there's a checkmate back here. And after pawn to d6, queen back to d2. Now black gets to win that pawn on f3.
That looks great.
And rook takes f3, and already this is looking very nice. The queen is overloaded there. In actual fact, actually, the game continued fairly quickly. The queen's got swapped on a pawn. I was about to win a second pawn when my opponent resigned. That was Dane Cup 1998. That may be around about the time I lost to Magnus. It's the same venue. I can't believe I just brought that up myself. Actually, I'm like trained. So anyway, returning back to the move King B1, and here's where we get going here. So in this position here, black now just out of the blue. Remember, there's no bishop on e6, attacking a2, nothing like that. Black basically played knight takes f3, just like that. Knight takes f3. Now,
how funny!
Right? Absolutely, it is funny. And white played knight takes f3, and now rook takes c3.
Ah, that is the difference. Although there's no bishop on e6, this time we have the rook on c8.
Yeah, but I think it's fair to say that if white took with the pawn here, and after knight takes e4, we're creating quite a handy attack with the knight.
Totally, yeah.
The bishop and the queen with knight takes c. Well, obviously the queen's attack. Knight takes c3.
This looks
a2.
Dead.
And by the way, this bishop could still join the action, as could this rook, of course, on c8. So quite a lot of black pieces getting involved.
A little dream for every dragon player, I assume, this position.
Yeah. So it's probably fair to say that although white was hoping to get their own attack going, around about now is a good stage to say, you know what, I think we'll get the queen swapped off around about this stage. So queen takes c3, queen takes c3, b takes c3, and now black plays bishop takes g4.
Oops, not taking on e4 yet. Oh, well,
no,
not
because now we're taking
yet.
Because, well, the point, it's going to be a nice pawn to win, without a doubt, but it's probably not going to be checkmate in a hurry now. So now it's going to be a case of bagging as many pawns as we can. And hence why I mentioned we're going to have a bit of endgame fun here.
I see.
So you can see we're attacking this knight, pinning it to the rook, and of course we've still got this pawn here on e4. So the idea is, and this is quite a key point to note here. Well, in this particular position here, white played bishop g2. I did actually annotate quite a while back. What year would it have been? 2007. A game where Hikaru had the black pieces in this position, and his opponent tried to sneak in the move h6 here.
Ooh.
And that game actually saw bishop h8 here. The game went like this, so we have similar things, very similar to in the game, but white gave up here. And I'm just whizzing through a few moves here, and then we got this end game back here, which Magnus went on to win. And now if we can just stop here. So here it's just a piece, isn't it? And black's got 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to have to keep counting the pawns every now and again. So there's actually 4 pawns for a piece, even though the bishop, and of course a potential, quite a lot of connected passed pawns potentially.
Yeah,
now.
but you meant Hikaru, or because you just said Magnus, or?
No, Hikaru Nakamura.
Yeah, exactly. Because you just said.
Did I say Magnus?
Yeah, for a moment. Yeah, it's now you cannot get him out of your head.
I can't get him out of my mind now. Okay. So in this particular game, white played bishop to g2, and but I've got a little story. Yeah, I know you like my stories.
Please.
So I've got a little story. This is absolutely true story here.
Okay.
So I actually had this position here. Let me just talk to you here. So we're gonna get to the story because it's worthwhile hearing this story, and you had to be there to actually see it. So knight takes e4. So knight takes e4 as again the move we wanted to play.
Yes.
And we're now attacking. What are we threatening now? So on one hand we're threatening this pawn here, and we're threatening this pawn here, but we haven't forgotten that we've only got one of those rook-shaped ones, whereas white has 2 of those ones, and they're quite handy for going along straight lines, basically. So this position here in this game here, white played the move king c1. So this has just happened in the last few weeks, the move king c1 in the intercollegiate event in the Seattle between Carissa Yip and Brian Ramirez Escalante. Now, here we go. Now, the fact is, I had this position twice in the year of 1997. One of them against the Chinese Grandmaster Wang, and the other against Chessbase's very own Karsten Mueller. Very own Karsten Mueller. And
an endgame specialist, to remind everybody.
An endgame specialist. And the funny thing is, this is funny. So when I played Karsten Mueller, he played the move rook d3. Essentially the game went as follows: knight takes c3, check. And he played here, if I can try and find it, king b2. I played rook c8. God. And so he's allowing me to do numerous discovered checks.
Yes.
These ridiculous complications, right? And then he flicked his pawn down to h6. So one of the big debates is it to white's advantage or not to keep this pawn on the board? On one hand, you'd think it would increase their winning chances because at least they're not running out of pawns. And these pawns are very handy for getting new queens. But on the other hand, if you lose that pawn, then that's even more connected pass pawns that the opponent has.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the funny story. I was playing Karsten Mueller. I remember it now. It was in the German Bundesliga. It was a match.
For which team did you both play? Karsten Mueller, probably for Hamburg?
Yeah, he was playing for Hamburg. Yeah, I was actually on the books at Hamburg, but I never got to play. And I was playing for Wuppertal.
Okay, yeah.
Funny enough, I've got a sweatshirt that says Hamburg Shack Club or whatever. But I've never actually got.
You swapped shirts after the game.
Yeah, we swapped after the game. No, it wasn't quite like that. So anyway, the funny thing is, before the game, my team captain, he was great. I'm not going to mention any names. He came up to me, very good English, and he said to me, Chris, I know you're black against Karsten Mueller. I'd like you to play solid chess. He said, try for the win, but keep the draw in hand. He said, and he looked at me and I said, have you got any other special requests? Anyway, he went off, came back, saw I was a rook 4 pawns down, and he gave me such an evil look you would not believe. To say, obviously in Germany we have a different definition of the word solidly. So anyway, to show you this, I'm not going to go over this game, but a few moves later we reach this position, so where you can see White's still got an extra rook, but I'm busy trying to amass some extra pawns. Mm-hmm. Loads of stuff happened in the interim. But then on move 51, we finally reached this position here where I've managed to get one of my pawns finally towards the end of the board. Insane. And unfortunately for him, he basically, it's quite a nice little idea. We get a repetition because that's the only way for him to stop the pawn. So he's obviously an endgame expert, but I shouldn't think he gets many endgames quite like that.
Probably not. Although he's also an attacking player, and he recently made a Fritz trainer about attacking, funnily enough. Also, so yeah.
Great guy, great guy. But at the end, I was able to say to my team captain, I wouldn't say I always had the draw in hand, but I did try for the 2 out of 3 wasn't bad. If you forget about the solid, actually it was probably 1 out of 3, wasn't it? But anyhow, so let's return to the real game here. So we've got Carissa Yip against Brian here, and we have knight takes c3. Mm-hmm. So attacking the rook on d1, which then promptly moved to e1.
So
black grabs another pawn in the bag, of course. King went to b1. Now the thing is, I think if king d2, then we've got bishop c3 check, and we can take that and get the other rook involved. And then we're talking one piece rather than a rook, and I think that would definitely be in black's favor. So in this game here, white basically went king b1. We had a check again, king c1. So it looks as though, of course, in this position, black could just repeat for the draw in actual fact. But black played a very interesting move, and not the most obvious move you would expect to see in this position here. What he actually did here was he took the pawn on h5 with his pawn. Now, I think
White
most
has 1 pawn left. It's so crazy.
So that's it. I mean, I would have thought the idea of bishop takes h5 would be more obvious, because then you've got all these, how many connected pass pawns? So you've got 4 connected pass pawns, plus a D pawn for good measure, an outside A pawn and a B pawn. But we are put down by a rook, of course. But black chose to take with the pawn, probably because it means that his pawn this one is a little bit further advanced already. and obviously there's instant security to the bishop on g4. So here, okay, over to white to move. We're just starting this game now. I did tell you we were going to bring in. There are a lot of end games like this where you get basically a lot of pawns for a.
That's super interesting. So what? Now the biggest of all questions, and you will continue, of course, with all of this now. But I'm just wondering, like, who would you rather play? And that's probably your taste, your own taste. So I'm a pawn player, so I would like to have the pawns more. But there is no clear advantage now, or is there?
No, I mean, I think actually, funny enough, if you even go back a couple of moves, or even around about here, the engines will actually, the various engines will assess this position of somewhere like 0.00 to about 0.00 or 0.03 one way or the other, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's a matter of taste, really. You're absolutely right. Do you take the pawns? Do you take the extra rook? The only thing I would say is it's probably more fun having the pawns up until you lose. Once you lost, that's not so good.
But at least not that much fun.
Before you lose, you get all the chance of pushing pawns. So, and we're going to have a bit of fun. So we're going to keep going with this. So I would imagine part of the problem is if white took this pawn on a7 now, for example, then it's going to allow the rook to come to a8 quickly as well and get involved. So white played bishop d4, a fairly logical move, after which black took here and then put his pawn to e5. So not many good squares. Now the knight came back to b3. I would imagine if it went to f3, then we would have got under starters orders with this. So knight b3. And now the next move saw black play b5. Now that's not the pawn you think is about to promote, but black's entire plan is just to put this pawn here to secure permanently.
Oh, that is so nasty. I mean, good for black, yeah.
Good for black. That's well, yeah. It's a nice plan. And white now played king d2 because you think, from white's point of view, okay, it's to do with plans. Obviously, we could talk about advancing so many different pawns.
True.
But white obviously needs to get some activity if they're going to do anything. They've got to get the rooks on the act. Obviously, doubled rooks along the 7th rank would be a dream for white. Quite a long distance away, that particular dream. And the only other thing, really, the other real plan that white might ever have, really, is to create a passed pawn of their own. When I say a passed pawn, the remaining pawn to be passed, I suppose you could call it. Again, not happening anytime soon. Pawn to b4 secured that attack knight, and rook came to a1. And so black says, you know what? I'm not bothered about defending that pawn on a7. I can't defend it anyway. Let's get going with our f pawn. White said, thanks, I'll have my rook on the 7th rank. And black said, good, I'm getting my pawns a little bit further down the board. Here we go. And now it's white to play. I mean, and this is like, how do you go about deciding? I mean, I'd love Karsten, basically. I'm not sure he has general rules in his endgame books for how white should play these sort of positions. Should he be, other than getting the rooks on the 7th rank, which seems like a nice idea, but don't forget this black f pawn isn't that far from coming down the board.
Yeah, I guess at one point you just have to consider, when do I sacrifice one of my pieces for one or two pawns, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly true, basically. But obviously, in the interim, if white could get this rooks on the 7th rank, but there's just no time to do that at the moment. The question is, and this was a logical idea, white played rook a8 here because the logic was, if we swap off a pair of rooks, then I'm going to maybe have more chance to blockade those pawns, can activate my remaining rook. So this is what happened here. I think. I think that's a reasonable kind of idea. The rook takes a8 and bishop takes a8, and now, of course, black has to be careful not to allow white a dark squared blockade. So putting the pawns on white squares would then require the knight to have to control the dark squares, which might not be so easy with the bishop controlling d5. Next move, very sensible move, king g7, as if to say, I know another piece which can help advance my pawns. And that is the king, of course. So the king came, and now it's over to white. So, for example, in this position here, I can't believe from my Dragon website I found myself analysing this endgame in quite a bit of depth. White's next move is probably not the best, but it's certainly a logical move. And it all boils down to do with the fact of wanting to get a pass pawn or destabilize this knight.
Uh-huh.
So what white actually played here was knight a5 with a view to trying to pick off that pawn. Because
Okay.
again, if you can win that pawn, maybe white, it's a long shot to get a pass pawn of their own still, but it happened. But one variation I thought which maybe white could have played, an alternative line that maybe should reach a draw, is if white played knight c1, e4, advancing those pawns, why not? Rook f1 attacking the pawn. We have to be careful now because if we go e3 check and the king moves, then we're going to lose that f4 pawn. Remember, this bishop on a8 helps cover f3. So we're actually e3 check, king e1 would lose that pawn. And after f3, I think there's a nice move in knight a2. And the idea is now you're luring away that so that you can win that one here. And I think because all these pawns are kind of isolated, I think it's fair to say that something like this should just end in a draw because white's going to be able to pick up one of them. So probably that would have been a way for white to play to draw. But instead, knight a5 occurred. Black continued marching the king up down the board. And then we have knight c6, attacking b4. But I think black missed a very nice sequence here, really nice sequence. What they could have played here is played the move knight to e4 check. The king goes, and then bishop f3. Now, the purpose of this move is obviously you're attacking the rook when there's no option for it to activate. And if rook g1 in this position, then the move knight g5 is incredibly powerful because it now unleashes a pin down here, which has been why it's got themselves into a bit of pickle. And also, of course, there's a super duper simple plan of just marching that pawn down the board. And of course, that pawn was the one which was created after the move g takes h5.
The irony.
So I think that's a really nice idea. Instead, black played the move bishop f3 immediately, pinning the knight to the rook. And that did enable white the chance to play rook a1 to protect. And then h4. And then white got to take this pawn on b4. So white's achieving that aim. We have a swap of the bishops. So the bishops are off now. So we're getting closer and closer down things. And then the black knight now, which is attacked, play came to e4 check. King moved over to here to e2, and then h3. So we've got a very serious plan here now. Simply threatening to go h2, yeah. And if the rook comes back, then there's a knight g3 check, which will help promote the pawn.
Oof, how to stop that? Okay, king.
King f3 was the start. The knight did come to g3, and now white played knight d3. So it's all hands to the pump now with this knight, the one that's coming over to f2 to stop the pawn. That's exactly what happened. H2, knight f2. And we get a new queen. The knight takes, and then the knight takes. And now we're moving on to the next phase.
Felt good for a second.
Felt good for a second. Now rook h8, trying to pick up this stray pawn over here. There's not much point coming
now.
Not much point coming here because then the d pawn. So we have to come here. King f5.
All right.
Check. Here, rook h8. And so black played knight g3. Rook takes h7, and then king d5. So now it's just the three connected pass pawns. Again, it'll be interesting to see what theory. I'll have to check out Karsten's Endgame books to see if he studies this sort of thing.
The scary part is probably he has.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, quite possibly. The game. So now we obviously black now wants to get to advance this pawn, but he's going to need to have this one protected. But equally, the knight could come to f5 and into d4. And that's exactly what happened. C3 covered that d4 square. So then now the knight came to e3. We're buzzing around. Really difficult for white now. It's pretty much white's on the painful end of this, but it's still definitely looking to defend. Rook c8. Knight c4 here. Rook c7. Knight b6, kind of maneuvering around. Let's see.
Yeah, the knight wants to protect the f pawn, I assume, right?
Well, the other thing, of course, those black might be planning to come here to facilitate this king to come offer a little bit of coverage there. Rook b5 check. So we're just playing some moves here while black maneuvers around, just enjoying his position. King d5. You think, well, are we really making progress? Possibly not. That's what we love about this. Right, and then finally, the knight does make it to c5 and rook b8. And now the knight comes to d3 and think, what is really going on here? And of course, we can see now, as you mentioned, possibly looking to advance that. Rook b5 check. king c4. And here I think actually white makes a potentially fatal mistake. I think it's difficult to create generalizations here, but white played the move. I think white should play the move rook b8, keeping with the old keeping the distance rule, which is usually what you try to do, keep the distance with the rook. White actually played rook to b6. And now here is where black missed a golden opportunity, I think. They played the immediate move e4 check, but actually, this was the opportunity to play d5, and after rook c6 check, king here. And now we'd get that check, which was the cherished check, to advance a little bit further down the board. And after here, now the black knight is perfectly placed to help advance still further down the board. So I think quite probably this would be a winning variant.
What? Yeah, okay, yeah.
Instead, jump the gun a little bit with e4 check. I don't know what that was all about. Maybe kind of blundering. Must have been a blunder. And then just must have been a blunder because two isolated pawns are really that you're not going to win with isolated pawns now. No problem. And this is where the game ended in a draw after all that fun. Ooh. After all that fun, just a boring draw.
Well, maybe it was kind of a good result because two parties had a lot of fun and then it's equally shared this fun. Wow. So this is what you've just shown us. It is kind of a variation which has been played a couple of times and you really have, you're up a couple of pawns, 7-1 in this example.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's a variation which is played. I mean, I just mentioned a couple of times where I had it in the same year, actually. Both of those endgames were crazy endgames with pieces for pawns. One against the German, the Chinese GM Wang, and one, I remember that was a London.
Wang is, if it's the same Wang, there's hundreds of Wangs, but there's, of course, if it's the one Wang Hui.
I think we could go up from hundreds in actual fact, but yes, that's right. So yes,
who play chess? Let's say like that.
Yeah, so Wang Zilli, I think that was. But anyway, the fact is that it's a crazy endgame. But outside of my games, it's literally been played hundreds of times. This endgame.
Funny, it's crazy.
But my concern is that there's a number of points where white should investigate playing this bishop e2 move, just to cut across these sacrifices on f3, which is a bit of a dampener. But apparently, a lot of white players don't seem to know about that. So if you're listening to this from a white perspective, definitely I would recommend that sort of thing. But, other than saying, frankly, you're not welcome around here. But if you hear from the black point of view, just make sure you look into those. Maybe you can come up with some sort of idea yourself. And maybe we'll revisit that sort of thing at some stage in the future.
Fantastic.
But, that was... So essentially, we've had a 9g4 castles, bishop d7, 9g4 variation or 9 castles, which would transpose after the line where black plays bishop d7. Not that fashionable at the moment, but as I say... Evidently, we still find games. We had two young IMs playing in this line here, of course. So, not just your average club players, and a pretty thrilling encounter, basically.
Fantastic encounter, super enjoyable. One of the most enjoyable endgames I have looked at in the past time because, you just have normally a couple of pieces. But I mean, this constellation of having the pawn horde climbing up slowly but surely and
space invaders.
Yes, it's really pew pew pew. That wasn't in the 80s, not even the 90s, but the 70s, to be clear. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Chris, for this absolute stunning example. I am looking forward for our next show. Until then, study and see you soon for the next Monthly Dragon.
See you soon, everyone. See you soon.
Bye-bye.